Okay, so now let's learn or go over measuring concepts and issues. And the learning objectives is to define and describe the process of conceptualizing a variable for measurement purposes, developing an operational definition of variables of importance to a study, describing the level of measurement variable or variables in particular study and the importance or levels of measurement, explaining the 5 types of reliability used in measurement variables, and explaining the importance of validity and measuring instruments and distinguish among the 3 major types of validity. So what is measurement in research? So measurement is the process of sorting and, when possible, quantifying information in a consistent, systematic fashion. And it entails collecting data in relation to certain variables and assigning the appropriate value in categories of values to individual cases. So for example, you can quantify or measure things like depression, stress, family violence, etc. So we need to think about what, in preparation for data measurement, what data do we need to collect and what instruments or methods will be used to collect it. So it entails collecting data in relation to certain variables and assessing values or value categories to individual cases, and the process of sorting and, when possible, quantifying the data collected in a systematic fashion. So what is conceptualization? It is selecting and specifying what we believe to be the most important or relevant variables to measure, and it specifies precisely as possible exactly what we mean by those variables. So this is more of a dictionary definition. So what do we mean by this term? So in this case, what is the definition, for example, of discrimination, of addiction, of depression, of domestic violence? So we need to provide a definition for this, for these terms. Operationalization refers to specifying the actual measuring instruments or methods that will be used to measure each variable. So it specifies how the variables of interest will be measured specifically in the current study. So for example, again, what do we mean by depression? But in this case, it would be helpful to find an instrument that helps you define depression. And or for example, alcoholism. What is alcoholism? It's a drinking 10 or more alcoholic drinks every day. So we need to operationalize it. So levels of measurement. So nominal. So these type of measurements are the most basic form of measurement. They are exclusive or mutually exclusive value categories of a variable. So for example, this could be race, gender, sexual orientation, marital status. So order of category is not important. Ordinal. So for ordinal, it meets all the criteria for nominal, plus the value category possesses some logical rank ordering. So for example, this could be customer satisfaction, very satisfied, unsatisfied, satisfied, and very satisfied. or attitudes, for example, strongly disagree, neutral, agree, or strongly agree. Interval meets all the criteria for ordinal, plus it has the exact differences between the values of the variable. So for example, these could be IQ test score, SAT or GRE score, or temperature. So what is a racial level? So this meets all the criteria for interval, plus it is an absolute 0. So some examples include number of children, annual income, and number of treatment sessions. So criteria for good measurement. Reliability. So we can demonstrate that it produces consistent results when measuring the same object or individual in a variety of situations and under different conditions. And validity, we can demonstrate that it actually measures what it claims to measure. So test, retest reliability requires testing the same participants twice, using the same measurement instrument to measure a variable both times, and then comparing the pair of measurements for each case. So parallel forms of reliability. So sometimes for various reasons, it is necessary to have two or more forms of a data collection instrument or test. While individual items and them will differ, the different forms should be comparable so that regardless of which form of individual completes, the results will be the same. So that is, it should be a high degree of parallel forms of reliability. So parallel forms of test reliability have been developed for many standardized achievement and knowledge measures. For example, the SAT or GRE, as well as other tests designed to measure many attitudes or perceptions. So split half reliability. So an estimate of split half reliability entails dividing a single measurement instrument into two equal parts and correlating the total scores on one half with the total scores on the other half. So the two halves may be derived, for example, placing the even number items in one group and the odd numbers in the second group. And the reliability estimate is derived from using the split half method, is really an estimate of an internal consistency of the measure, that is, the degree to which half of the measurement within an instrument are correlated with the other half. Split half reliability estimates have been popular in the past, primarily because of simplicity of their calculation. They are quickly and easily calculated by hand. So what is the coefficient alpha? The coefficient alpha provides an estimate of the reliability of a measurement instrument by generating the average correlation among all pairs or items. So if a coefficient alpha analysis produces a high positive correlation coefficient, it can be determined that responses to individual items or questions are highly correlated. So when this is the case, the instrument is strong in internal consistency. So this is a hallmark of coefficient alpha. So validity refers to how accurately a method measures what is intended to measure. So if it's intended to measure depression, does it actually measure the depression that your clients are experiencing? So a measure can be reliable without being valid, but it cannot be valid without being unreliable. So what is content validity? Content validity. So content validity assesses that whether a test is representative of aspects of a construct, whether it measures the content that was covered in the learning environment. So for example, a researcher creates an instrument to measure the eating disorder bulimia nervosa. The instrument contains items that measure binging behaviors only. While the instrument may consistently measure binging behaviors, it has good reliability. It would not be a valid measure of bulimia nervosa because it does not include other necessary symptoms of bulimia, such as purging behaviors and self-evaluation based on body shape and weight. So criterion validity measures how well one measure predicts an outcome for another measure. A test has this type of validity if it is useful for predicting performance or behavior in another situation. So for example, if a job applicant takes a performance test during the interview process, if this test accurately predicts how well the employee will perform on the job, the test is said to have criterion validity. The same, if for example, the SAT or GRE, if they're able to accurately predict how well the students will do in school, then it is said to have criterion validity. So there is, within criterion validity, there's concurrent validity, which means that it produces a high positive correlation between two measures, both made approximately the same time. So for example, if we develop an instrument and presume to measure charisma, we might demonstrate its concurrent validity by pilot testing it with two groups. People generally acknowledge to possess charisma and those who are believed to lack it. If the instrument has concurrent validity, the first group should achieve high scores, whereas the latter group should achieve low measurements of the variable. Or for example, let's say a group of nursing students take two final exams to assess their knowledge. One exam is a practical test and the second exam is a paper test. If the students who score well on the practical test also score well on the paper test, then concurrent validity has occurred. And there's also something called predictive validity. So how well a measure can predict future performance of behaviors, as I mentioned earlier. So for example, if newly developed screening inventories to predict abusive behavior might be correlated with the results of follow-up studies of research participants who completed the inventories to determine how well the instruments were able to predict abusive behaviors. Also, again, entry test, how well does it predict future performance in college? So construct validity is the extent at which the measure behaves in a way consistent with theoretical hypotheses and represents how well scores on the instruments are indicative of the theoretical construct. So for example, if a researcher develops a new questionnaire to evaluate respondents' levels of aggression, the contract validity of the instruments would be the extent to which actually assesses aggression as opposed to assertiveness, social dominance, and so forth. So it has to, again, actually assess what it's supposed to assess. So if it's assessing depression, is it actually assessing different constructs related to depression? So convergent validity is a degree to which the measure correlates to other constructs or variables believed to be related to the targeted construct. So in this case, self-esteem is related to self-worth, confidence, social skills, and self-appraisal. Discriminant validity measures or is the degree to which the measure does not correlate with other constants believed not to be related to the targeted construct. So this is the opposite. Measures of constructs that theoretically should not be highly related to each other are in fact not found to be highly correlated to each other. So tests that constructs that should have no relationship do in fact have no relationship. So sources of measurement error. So what groups has a measurement been used on? So there are 5 suggestions to avoid cultural bias or systematic measurement error. So one should understand one's own values and cultural perspectives and how this might influence definitions of contracts. Instruments is designed to measure. You should consult members of group of interest related to your study. The translation of instruments from the first language to the second should be used by bilingual fluent translators, and you should translate back to the first language using skilled translators and compare to the original version. And field test translated tools with bilingual participants should be conducted. So this will be helpful also for your quantitative article critique. So you need to think about what type of sampling technique does your article use. You need to describe it as a sample representative. Does your article have any sampling bias? And how does your article conceptualize and operationalize the variables? How does your article address reliability or validity of measures? Well, thank you so much. I hope you have a great week.